Hi, my name is Mattia Murray, and welcome to The Longer Road. You are on the longer road if you have multiple intersectional identities that are often marginalized. You've had to work harder to get to the starting line, and you might feel behind. I'm here to provide hope, support, and practical tips, and to let you know that you're not alone. Welcome to my guest, Thomas Henley. He is an autistic podcaster, and I found him on, I'm going to say Instagram, and has really, really great content. And then also the reason I'd reached out to him is because I'm going to be on his podcast, the Thoughty Auti. Is it the Thoughty Auti, the Autistic Podcast? Is that the full title?
Thoughty Auti Podcast. Yeah.
Yeah.
The Autism Pod.
Yeah. And so he's here, and I'm super, super excited. He has both a really interesting background, which I'm sure we won't get to all of it, but also I really, really want to especially highlight his online, social media content, because it's really detailed and useful, and I've been reposting it a lot. So if you follow me, you've probably seen me reposting his content. And is there anything you'd like to add about how you're thinking about yourself today?
Yeah, how I am, as in not too bad. I've had a lot of different things happening in my life at the moment, so it's kind of a bit all over the place. But I've actually, for a very rare time in my life, I feel like I'm coping with it all pretty well. So I'm good.
Oh, that's always nice to hear.
How are you?
I'm also pretty good. Yeah. I had a big creative deadline yesterday, so I'm feeling an enormous amount of relief not having that project staring at me in the face. Yeah, and I would love to open with just the question, what are you passionate about right now, like in your life or work or anything you want to talk about?
I think at the moment I tend to have a lot of different passions, so I don't have like one singular thing. I think at the moment, a lot of my passion is coming through where doing my online work, like whether it's my podcast or my speaking or my social media. I found a lot of meaning and value in that kind of work. And also, I think definitely stuff to do with the gym, because that's been something that's very regulating for me, and it's something that I really enjoy, and I watch a lot of content around workouts and things of that nature. So I'd say those two. And
something that I think is very funny is that after I started following you and watching your content, the internet was like, oh, you want autistic thirst trap content? And it started showing me other people. I was like, I didn't even know this was a genre.
Are there any more?
Yeah. I mean, really? I don't even want to describe one of the ones that it showed to me. I was like shocked that this was even allowed to be online. I was like, yeah, it was somebody like showing off a t-shirt, but like she turned all the way around and like bent over. And I was like, oh my God, are we allowed to for free?
I didn't realize that I was posting thirst trap content.
Not all of it, but I would say some of the workout ones. And again, I just didn't know that was a niche that apparently exists, because the internet is now showing me more of them.
No, it's I think you're talking about like my bodybuilding progress videos that I do. Anything for me, like I really need to have like something to keep me accountable, or some kind of goal that I'm reaching to get to. And so I wanted to have a reason to like document my progress, because it's a bit strange, because perhaps in other sports like taekwondo, like what I used to do, you know, I'd get medals and I'd have pictures of me in the podium. But it's a bit different with like bodybuilding and strength training, because it's not always easily, like a lot of the competitions that you can go to and like the very professional ones, a lot of the people are using performance enhancing drugs, and it's not something that I particularly want to do. It's kind of a way for me to document my progress. And I think as well, there is quite a heavy tendency towards infantilization, particularly of autistic individuals. And, you know, with everything that I do, both within my life and online, I try to challenge that in some respects. You know, I challenge the kind of the stereotypes that people might have around how autistic people may look and what autistic people may do and what they may be good at. I see them as targets and challenges.
Yeah. And I one of the things you'd mentioned when we chatted a bit before was, yeah, that you have this sense of like, these are the stereotypes. And because I want to specifically push back against that, you did things like backpacking for months,
Yeah.
right? To show like
Yeah.
independence. Do you want to talk about that experience at all?
Yeah, sure. So that was, can't remember. I'm not very good with dates, but it was in my third year at university. I studied biomedical sciences at the University of Manchester, and there was this industrial experience year that you can do before your final year at the university. And some people, they'll go to different laboratories around England. Some people go abroad. I went for the most far out place that I could find. I think it was a toss up between going to Africa and going to Thailand. And I basically went there to study mosquitoes, which is completely different to, for example, the work that I do now. But it was interesting. I mean, I had to learn how to dissect mosquitoes with needles under a microscope, which was, for me, my fine motor skills not very good. So that was a challenge. I had to do about 100 of them. But apart from that, I was kind of lumped in with a few other students from Manchester who had also gone over to do various scientific endeavors, and they were all very willing to and wanting to kind of explore and travel. And so a lot of, like, every couple of weeks we'd go traveling a different place and go to see a different area of Thailand. I went on a trip with my dad, which was like this package kind of bus tour holiday, which went through like Singapore and Malaysia and things like that. And I got a bit of a taste for it, and I felt quite comfortable with that. So when my friend said that he was going to go around Southeast Asia for about 2 months after our research placement ended, I jumped on it, and I went with them. And we went through the Philippines, Cambodia, Vietnam, lots and lots of different places, all with a big rucksack on my back.
Yeah. And I'm so curious about that, because I used to think I didn't like traveling, and then I realized it's more, I don't like the like constant decision making while traveling. And I imagine that with something like backpacking, you're figuring out, well, I don't know, maybe you did plan it out more, but like what was that like for you with the like, I don't know how it was affecting your normal sense of like routine, or like what was it just like, was it totally outside of your regular processing? Did it feel totally different?
I think there was a lot of elements to it. I think it definitely was anxiety provoking sometimes, and particularly during the start of it, because as you know, you're never in the same place. And we kind of planned it out, as in, we had set times to be for certain planes, and so we'd kind of work around that, give ourselves a few days in a certain area. The night before we leave, we'd book a hotel and go stay at that hotel in that area. I think one of the interesting things is that after a while, constant change becomes a somewhat normal thing. Like it felt normal at a certain point, like a weekend where I was kind of used to the fact that I didn't have much else to do but to try and plan, try and Google and find places to go to, and try and fit in as much as possible. And I think I had a lot of sort of thoughts holding me back about, and emotions holding me back from actually going and doing the traveling. But once I was actually within the flow of it, and I knew kind of a rough idea of where we're going to go at what time, and we had a certain amount of time to play with, then it started to become a lot more comfortable for me. I think the only thing that I really struggled with was the sleeping in different places that you don't know, perhaps in group accommodation with people that you don't know, and sometimes in situations where it was hard to get around with like traveling and the communication language barriers and stuff. I think even though it was difficult, I did sort of get into a routine of it. And I went to bed around about the same time. I woke up quite early, and we went and did stuff, and it was just something that I eased into over time.
I was very struck by that idea that constant change can become its own like routine or its own normal, because I moved a lot when I was, well, still a bit, like, I think the longest I've lived in any one place is 5 years. But there was a period of time where I was moving like every 6 to 12 months, typically, usually due to cost. So I got to the point where I was just like, yeah, I kind of like moving. I kind of like getting rid of stuff, packing my stuff. I was just like, you know what? This is just what I do now. It became my thing that I like put some effort into getting good at, so that it wouldn't just be terrible. Anyway, that's on a different scale, obviously, like of longer time. But yeah, that definitely became the case. Yeah. So one direction that I was thinking, from what we were just talking about, that we could talk about is, this idea of autistic stereotypes, because I think about this a lot as well. And, there's this really interesting factor that's been studied where people who are not autistic immediately dislike autistic people within seconds to minutes of experiencing them, even if they're just looking at them and not listening to them, right? Like, just say like video, there's this sort of cue to the neurotypical person that like, or the allistic person, meaning non-autistic, that there's something off. But then when they're told, oh, this person's autistic, they're like, oh, never mind. And they like you again. And so I've recently, I found, kind of fallen into this pattern of kind of wanting to front load that information and tell people I'm autistic like right away, so that they don't dislike me. But I also,
it kind of comes up though. It just comes up in conversations like, what do you do? And like, oh, I do online stuff about autism. I was like, why? I'm autistic. Like to talk. Like,
it comes right up.
It's a bit more natural.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm autistic. My name's Tom.
Yeah. And at the same time, like, there's, to go back to the stereotype idea, there's a part of me that doesn't like that I kind of have to do that in certain settings in order to not be disliked.
Sure.
And I mean, I could, I guess, just go back to like masking really hard. I don't know how good my masking ever was, though. That's the thing. Like,
yeah, I wasn't very good at it.
Yeah, I don't think
it wasn't a skill of mine.
Yeah. My parents are both neurodivergent, and I just did not learn masking well. They both thought it was stupid and that you shouldn't have to do it. Not in the nice sense of like, we're teaching you how to love your brain, but in more of a like, we think the world sucks, which is a different vibe. They thought they were better than other people. But anyway, what kind of, if this is something you're currently dealing with or thinking about, like, what kind of stereotypes do you think still come up that you feel like are still, even with, the education you're doing and the stuff you're putting out there, what do you still feel like you're coming up against a lot?
Well, I thought it was quite interesting that you were talking about people sort of instantly disliking you. And I think I've read some studies about how people interpret lack of eye contact. I think they did some studies showing that individuals who don't make a lot of eye contact, they're seen as more shifty or up to something or mistrustful. And I think as well, people have this sense that someone's different, and a lot of the time they kind of fall on this idea, oh, this person's a strange person. I don't need to talk to these people. It's sort of like a red flag, an unconscious red flag indicator for them.
Yeah.
And it's quite, to be honest, it's both of those things, they're quite natural. Like, it's not something that I think people do on purpose. They're all kind of these subconscious thoughts and feelings. And, I think that perhaps if we had a lot more autism education, I think people were more aware of that, and we're more aware of like the stigmas and such that can sometimes be carried with autism, that it would probably be a lot better for us in those kind of social situations. Instead of jumping to like, oh, they're shifty and mistrustful, and they're a bit strange, and they kind of, I can't put my finger on it, but they just don't seem to be matching my wavelength. Instead of going like, oh, hey, like, let's get rid of them and not talk to them, actually just being like, oh, they must be one of those different neurodivergent people. You know, perhaps I can continue talking and see, you know, see if they're a nice person to chat to. So I thought that was quite interesting, and I have a very big fascination with neurotypicals. Like, I'm absolutely, ever since I was young, I'm kind of like the opposite of an autism researcher, like a specialist in psychology. That I just really find the differences between how we think, feel, and perceive and behave just really fascinating, because, you know, as you'll know, there's these concepts of double empathy about how, you know, it's difficult to empathize and to understand people who don't run with the same kind of operating system, especially in social situations. And there's always that kind of natural disconnect and perhaps situations where miscommunication happens. And I think my interest in neurotypicals started when I was younger, because I was just absolutely dumbfounded at why neurotypicals just kind of seem to do things without thinking about it. They just were kind of emotionally driven to do things with it, you know, and I'll ask them like, oh, why did you do that? And they're like, I don't know, I just wanted to. I'm like, how do you know that you wanted to? You haven't thought about it meticulously and weighed up all the positives and negatives about why you're going to do this. So that's where it started. So I've always had that fascination with neurotypicals, but I think, you know, as far as the stereotypes, I think a lot of people have the stereotype that we're immature. And I think, you know, perhaps if you were to view it in the lens of the neurotypical way of being the best state, then perhaps that might be applicable in their eyes. But I think a lot of people don't understand, like, just how much we think about things, just how much we build our own meaning and values, and the joy that different things bring us. There's also those aspects of meltdowns and shutdowns and stimming, which may, you know, for many people, they might say, oh, bit emotionally immature because of that. So I think that there's definitely that barrier where a lot of autistic people feel infantilized by people that they talk to, whether it's medical professionals, whether it's parents, big one, or just anyone in general. It's like once you tell someone that you're autistic, it's they kind of feel like you're telling them you're autistic because you want something from them, and that you want sympathy or you want this kind of thing. But quite often it's just because, you know, you want to say like, oh, this is me, and I want to feel comfortable being myself around you, and this is how I differ, and this is how you might think about my differences. And it's really weird, the dynamic of how when we're younger, like, people will call us like little professors because we like to talk to adults, and we're quite coherent, and we speak well. We've got a lot of vocabulary. But then when we get to adulthood, people kind of feel like we're immature, which I find really strange.
Oh, yeah.
I think it's a lot to do with those social norms. You know, I don't think we're held so much to those social norms about how to outwardly show that you're a mature person, or what life goals to have by a certain age in order to be a mature person. I think we exist on our own wavelength, but we also have our own like individual life paths, which don't typically fit very neatly into that kind of those social norms and rules that people have for adults. I think that maturity aspect and the infantilizing is definitely a big stigma.
Yeah, that one gets me so riled up. Like, and I definitely had the thing as a kid, yeah, of being, you know, at a very young age, told how mature I was, up until the point where I was being perceived more as an adult. And then all of a sudden it was like, oh, wow, you're so like loud and immature and excitable and all these things. But yeah, I've always just assumed that the facade of maturity was made up, right? Like that people were just ignoring pleasure and play and like fun, and that they were like, it's really interesting because it's so funny. I'm just realizing like I've rather solipsistically assumed that everyone is like enjoying the world, but just trying to suppress it. But I have seen people, adults talk about how they just like don't really experience pleasure or fun or play, and that they have to kind of like rediscover it, or that like, say, having a child or playing with children helps them sort of rediscover it. And I'm just putting the pieces together that I think there are people actually having that experience, and not that they're like actively suppressing it in order to seem mature. Wild.
Yeah, possibly. I think there is definitely a component of, I think it's a lot to do with social validation, and I don't always think it's like a conscious effort. If you have situations where you really love Pokemon, and your group of friends that you go to the pub with, group of lads, and you go have a beer with them, and they're always picking on you for liking Pokemon, like you kind of, it's not a pleasant, it's not terrible, but it's not like a pleasant thing to be reminded of and told constantly. So I think that kind of thing, and also a lot of the times we have examples of other people's lives online to see and to emulate, which are not necessarily things that we want, but we're kind of aspiring, and we're seeing ourselves as this person is like a role model of how an adult should be. And I think for a lot of autistic people, we don't tend to have that kind of role model aspect to things, so we sort of we carve our own path with things, and we just go with what makes sense to us. Some social rules might make sense to us, some might not. I think it's a very individual thing. So the stigma would probably be that we're immature, whereas I would say that in reality we're probably just very individualistic, and we're not like trying to grasp at social validation to tell us that we're a successful adult.
Oh, I like that. Not trying to grasp at social validation to tell us that we're a successful adult.
Yeah, something like that.
That made me think of my last in-person day job that I had. One of my special interests is Arctic puffins. I'm like obsessed with them, truly obsessed. Like they make me cry so easily. And I started hyperventilating at work because somebody was just talking to me about puffins. And then one of my like teammates came over and was like, "You can't talk to Mattia about puffins after 4 p.m. You cannot do that." They will lose their fucking mind. Which, looking back, because I was around the time I started to be like, oh, maybe I'm autistic. Like looking back, it was like the later it got in the day, the more tired I was from like performing the work, culture stuff. And so like the farther it got along in the day, and my teammate knew this, like you can't just start talking to Mattia about something they're excited about like late in the day, because they will freak out. So anyway, that was a funny.
You have to reduce social inhibitions, and the monologues start to come through, and you're like, oh, I get excited, and you just keep rattling off. And I know what you mean.
But yeah, I mean, looking back at that, like I remember because my TA was on the research team, and we were kind of like off in the corner of the office, and we were all a little bit weird. So like we were just kind of doing our own goofy thing. And then like the president of the company also worked on our floor. And every time she would walk through, and she would just like look at us, like we're all like laughing and smiling. And she's just like, "Ugh, why are you guys so happy?"
It should be miserable.
Yeah,
it should be miserable and productive. And
because misery makes people productive. Totally.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I think, sorry, I think another stereotype stigma is you hear a lot about autistic people being amazing at maths, but struggling with that flexibility of play, like particularly when we're younger. I think that's a big stereotype, because to be honest, the majority of autistic people that I've met tend to be more creatively inclined than anything. And that's not just like because I talk to a lot of creators, it's just people that I've come across in daily life who are also autistic. They tend to gravitate very heavily towards the creative things, whether it's like illustration or particularly things about fiction that they like. I think the misconception there is that it's not that we lack flexibility of imagination. It's just that we need some kind of boundary to things. So like it's very difficult for us to kind of pick up on the way that someone wants to interact with us without someone giving us like a topic or something. Like it's so much easier to hop on and get or go to a group which is perhaps all about puffins, and you know that you're going to be talking about puffins, and it's not too hard, and you can talk about lots of different things within that boundary that is considered very creative. And you could talk about, you go to work, you know, you can be creative within the boundaries of what your organization is able to do. So I think people misrepresent, I think, how the autistic mind works in that way. It's not necessarily that we lack the flexibility of thought and creativity. It's just that we like to have some kind of boundary to something that we're doing, or else we just get confused, which I think is probably a lot more applicable to the creative world than just aimlessly going through and trying different creative endeavors and not really focusing on one particular thing.
Yeah. I think of it like part of my internal experience is sort of like a bouncy castle. Have you been in one of those? Like the big, like, you know, blow up things that you're inside, or like a ball pit or something, right? Where it's like there can be a lot of things flying around in there, but there's walls, so they fall back down. Like the balls land back in the ball pit. Versus if it's just a bunch of balls being thrown at me. This is such a weird analogy, but like, I don't know, if there's just like people throwing balls at me and there's like, no, I'm just like, okay, I'm not necessarily attaching to that thought or idea. It's just kind of flying by me. But anyway, within like some kind of boundaried space, you know, I can actually like let those ideas become something. Yeah.
Yeah. I know. I think there's lots of things that you could talk about. We could talk about how, you know, not every autistic person is good at maths. That's it's a big one. Yeah, we're not always great at those very logical things. Some of us just aren't. Some of us are. There's many things that I think I could touch on, but I think we'd be here a long time if I was to touch on everything. An obvious one, perhaps, which is more related to me, would be autistic people are not, you know, we're weak and we need protecting. I think there is some sense in which we might struggle in certain environments, but I think people definitely underestimate how strong-willed and willing to protect ourselves we can be. I mean, if you just look at the world's strongest man, they're autistic. If you look in lots of different areas in life, you have a lot of autistic and neurodivergent individuals who excel in sport. And the thing is, obviously, they may not be openly autistic sometimes. I think the misunderstanding comes in there is because we struggle with physical education at school. You know, those very highly social environments that tend to have a lot of team sports. You know, we can be very good at sport, just part in our liking of routine and schedules and our ability to focus and our ability to go away and I want to learn about certain things and copy things off other people. You know, those are all really amazing qualities in like athletes and strong people. So I think that's another thing that I would bring up.
Yeah. Well, there is the common, you know, like I have Ehlers-Danlos, which is very common in autistic people. So I am literally weak if I don't like do quite a bit around that. So that's a thing I think about. But I mean, gaining strength has helped that as well, because it kind of holds my joints in place. So it's also like a necessary thing. And it's pretty common for autistic people to have low muscle tone as well. And I think it's a combination probably of like EDS being more prevalent, which can lead directly to that. But I think it's also exactly what you're saying of just like not liking the settings in which you get to do, or in which one might be taught physical things, and just being like, well, that sucks. I don't want to go do that thing. So I guess I'll just like sit here and, you know, research my special interest or like do the thing that I like, which is not, you know, if it's not automatically something that's getting you moving, then it's very easy to not do that.
Yeah, you're not kind of immediately sort of introduced to that world through the education system. It's often something that your parents introduce you to outside of school. And if you've had that experience of being introduced to it outside of school, you know, everyone that I've talked to has had that experience. You know, they don't particularly like those team kind of educational based sports experiences, but then once, you know, they're out of that atmosphere, they're in a different place, they really enjoy it, and it becomes quite a large part of their routine and how they regulate on the daily.
Yeah. How did you get into that? Because I think one of the other things you mentioned is that you represented Great Britain for Taekwondo at one point, right? Like you were, was that?
A
Yeah.
few competitions.
Yeah. So like, how did you discover that you even liked that?
I think I mentioned earlier about the fact that I you know, we don't tend to have a lot of role models, and I was very much the same. And I find a lot of my role models within anime or cartoons. One particular one was Dragon Ball Z. That was something that I really felt. Another one was Naruto, and I think around about that time, I used to be quite a competitive swimmer up until the point where my mental health got a bit out of hand, and I realized that perhaps, you know, a lot of the experiences that I was having at school, I could be doing more about, or I could perhaps do with bolstering my confidence a little bit in terms of socializing with people. And I thought that going and doing a martial art or doing some kind of combat based activity would be something that I would really enjoy. And it would also be some way of me making myself feel more confident and stronger. So I went about and I tried lots of different martial arts. I tried Aikido, tried Jiu-Jitsu. Didn't particularly like those because you had to touch people, and I didn't like being touched or touching people. I didn't want to do boxing, so I didn't want to get brain damage. I tried a lot of different things. I tried like a sport called capoeira as well, like a Brazilian kind of dancey like martial art. That was quite fun though. But I eventually came across Taekwondo, and I liked it because it's primarily kicking. You can't like punch to the head or anything. It's you can only do like a body shot. And although that does have elements of striking, like the tendency of people to injure each other is much lower in those in Taekwondo. You have a lot of headgear and a lot of body armor and things like that. It's a full contact sport, but it just seemed right to me because I didn't particularly like to be touching people. So as much distance that I can get away from that, then that's good for me. And so I started a traditional club, just learning like the patterns and, you know, the movements that you do. Eventually, I got headhunted by a sports taekwondo place, and I had to basically each night, most nights, I would finish school, I would go home, I would have my tea, and then I would go out and travel about an hour to this sport taekwondo place, train for about 2 hours, come back, an hour on the way back, and then go to sleep. And that was kind of a big routine thing for me, and it was something that was hard for me sometimes, just because of the environment and the halls and the lights and training environment and the social aspects of it was hard. But I crawled myself up the ladder. I started competing. I eventually went to the British Championships. I got like a silver medal, got another silver medal, another silver, and then I got a gold medal. Moved up to adults, got a gold medal in adults, and I started to travel to different places to compete to get ranking points. I think one of the more notable competitions that I've done was the Commonwealth Championships, where I got a gold medal in the heavyweight division for juniors. So it's not quite adults yet, but just before I had to fight some Australian people. It was a very very big guy. I think, oh, man, it was so big, and his frame was a lot larger than mine as well. So it was a very close fight, and I think from that final fight, you know, it was the end of the day because we're like the heavyweights, and it's kind of staggered in according to your weight. And it was the final fight of the day, so everyone was just piled around my ring, and it was like this Rocky-esque kind of moment, and it's the closest fight that I've ever had as well. It was literally won by like a split hair, and I got best male fighter of the competition, which is I got like this trophy for it. And that was a really great experience for me, because I never thought that I'd be able to achieve something like that. I went abroad. I competed in the under-21 European Championships. I got the furthest out of all of the GB cohort at the time in the competition. Just lost out on a bronze medal to the eventual gold medalist. So I did a lot. I did a lot of training. I traveled and trained at camps with like the world's top athletes, and it was an all-around good experience. But I think it's really worth highlighting that it was not always the easiest thing for me.
Yeah.
It was quite hard at times.
Yeah. I just want to go like call back to earlier when you were talking about making a decision and like thinking through in autistic people thinking through all the options, because when I asked like how you found that, you were like, well, I tried everything and here were my like here were my reasons, or the things that, you know, the things I was looking for that I was trying to meet. Anyway, that was like the most considered answer to that, versus a lot of people who are just like, oh yeah, I tried it and I liked it, and so then I did it a bunch, right? Like you really thought about it and like tried a lot of things. And then the other sort of classic autistic thing that I'm seeing you do that I kind of want to point out is that like you're talking about these huge wins, right? Like big things, and you're just like, yeah, you know, right? Like just kind of like, yeah, blah blah blah. Which anyway, I do that too, and I see a lot of autistic people doing that, and it can, and it was a slight tangent, but I am going somewhere with it. I think it can actually be hard for us when we're in any position where we kind of have to sell ourselves, because we tend to not, we're just kind of like, you know, and you know that, right? Like, so I'm thinking of this from a business perspective, right? Because I know that you also coach. And anytime, you know, as an entrepreneur or just like a freelancer, anytime where you have to like put yourself out there, I'm like downplaying everything so much. And I want to make sure that everything I'm saying, anything I put out there is like factually correct and only that, and that I'm not exaggerating at all. But I know that because that's not how everyone is talking, it makes me look like I'm, you know, I'm like very quietly talking down here with like factually correct information. And then there are people like shouting over here. So anyway, I would be very curious to hear, I mean, if that resonated with you, what I just said about kind of like downplaying as an autistic person, like how you feel like that comes out for you in the content that you're creating. Because I mean, I've been, you know, watching a lot of it, and I think that I assume that you are much more impressive and have like done a lot more things than you are frequently talking about, right? You're usually just kind of like, you know, here's like regular life stuff. Yeah.
Yes. Well, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because when I was younger, I had a really strong tendency that if I wanted to be friends with someone, I would tell them all the reasons why they should be friends with me and how great I am. So I had a very big tendency to do that, and it's something that I remember my mom. My mom's really great, and she's been an absolute pillar for me, on just sort of with supporting me in pretty much any circumstance that I can think of in my life. And you know, obviously that didn't work, and that wasn't, you know, she very much, both my granddad, my mom's dad, and my mom, they're very humble people. My mom is a very, very, very successful, very well versed in the world of like special needs education, SEND in the UK. And she's the same. I don't know. I think for me, I have a very, like, I'm not always the best with my self-esteem. And when I feel like, you know, like my worst fear is that if I gloat that, or I not even gloating, if I tell people that stuff in a very excited way, that they think that they react badly to it, like, and they kind of think of it as a negative quality about me. I also just very much don't have very good self-esteem, as I said, which I think contributes a lot to me not wanting to share as much. I'm also aware that with my podcast, I've had like 60 episodes. So at some point I've mentioned everything, and I don't want to keep mentioning it. And you know, at the start of my journey, I was very, I guess, forthcoming with my achievements. And eventually I don't know, I prefer to like talk about concepts and things and let my ideas and my thoughts speak for themselves, rather than building up the person who's saying them, if that makes sense. I'm not sure really what I'm trying to say. I think I find situations where people tell me about how great they are and things like that. It's not something that I like. Like, because I don't necessarily see people on like higher or lower levels in my head. Like, I'll talk to someone I could talk to someone who's a celebrity and treat them the same as just someone that I meet, like when I'm out for a coffee or something. Like, I don't necessarily have that inbuilt. Well, I understand it, but I don't necessarily lean into that kind of social hierarchy kind of perception of things as well. I don't know if it's that's something that I've learned and something that I just preach because it's part of my values, or whether it just doesn't mean a lot to me. Like, I prefer to see people as they are and how they're talking to me rather than who they are, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, the non-hierarchical thinking is also specifically an autistic thing. I mean, an autistic trait that one can have, right? And I'd love that explanation, because I feel very similarly. I'm like, all my impressive shit is on the internet. You can find it if you want to. Like, it exists. And I have, like, it's not interesting to me to talk about. And exactly what you said. It's like, I like talking about ideas and like the ideas that I am developing currently. And I know I've heard people say this, that, like we're always changing and I'm different than I was before. And like, yes, that's technically true. But the way that I experience it more is like, my ideas are changing a lot and evolving and becoming new things. And I find that very endlessly interesting. And that's what I want to talk about, as opposed to like who I am right now. I don't know. I've never really thought of it in exactly that way. But I think part of it is the non-hierarchical thinking. I'm like, I don't have to, prove who I am. And actually one way that has showed up for me is, because I started college really young, there was a point in my teen years where I would often bring that up to sort of like let people know I am in this space functioning as an adult, even though I'm technically not an adult, And so I felt the need to do that. And then as soon as I became an actual adult and was like done with college, I was like, oh, me announcing how smart I am is not only fucking annoying, but also it doesn't do what I'm trying to do, right? It had a purpose before, which was like letting people know I am, independently speaking for myself right now, even though I look really young. But as an adult, I don't need to ever say that, because people will notice from how I am presenting myself, and if they don't, that's fine too. Right. So anyway, there's like this whole, I'm sure there's a whole mess of stuff there with my own.
There's definitely, I think, another element for me, which is a lot to do with kind of the negative experiences that I've had with people as well. Like, I'm very into psychology, and I've read up in lots of different kind of dynamics, whether it's like friendships or family, or whether it's romantic relationships. And so I'm very aware of the classifications of different types of behavior. And one of my sort of biggest insecurities is that, and it's something that's been propagated by people who are not very good for me, is that, I'm unempathic. Like, I don't feel empathy, and I don't think about or care for other people. There's been many times, and I think I've talked to other people who feel the same way. Like, they'll have situations where, especially if they're undiagnosed or they don't know that they're autistic, they will do lots of tests like, oh, am I showing these amounts of sociopathic or psychopathic or narcissistic qualities that perhaps aren't the best? And I think always having that in mind and wanting to not go into that stereotype or do behaviors which are seen as perhaps something akin to a superiority or complex or thinking highly of myself in any way. It's very much something that I don't like to see demonstrated in myself. It makes me feel bad about myself, and it makes me kind of question, like, oh, why am I doing that? Why am I thinking about myself in this way? And also equally with other people, you come across lots of people who are like that, and it gets on my goddamn nerves. I hate it. And it annoys me so much because these people use that kind of status and use that kind of interest that people have in them to just completely take up the entire space of a group conversation or some kind of event. Whereas you can have people sort of in the background who aren't really saying anything, who offer up some very nuanced and interesting ideas that just never get heard because of this one person. So I try very much to not fit into that stereotype and to very much, whenever I'm in a social group, I'll always try to look for the people who aren't speaking and try and get them to talk, and perhaps sometimes be a bit annoying or sort of cutting people off or exiting situations where someone's just rattling on and on about themselves constantly. I think it might be more akin to a personality trait, just that I just don't like that. But I think definitely from my previous experiences and from understanding about these types of behaviors, that's kind of what really informs the way that I view social situations.
Yeah, I also tend to, and since I was a kid, have like gravitated toward the people who are not participating and tried to loop them in a way that they liked. It definitely would have worked on me to have somebody just be like, here are the reasons you should be friends with me. Like,
oh yeah, totally. Like when I was younger, possibly,
approach.
But if someone came up to me then, like just in the real world, I would just be like, okay, like, sure.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, also, I'm just like thinking of the things that make people good friend material for me now. One of them is the quality, the like ADHD quality of if we don't talk for months, we just pick right up, where we left off, and that's fine. Totally. And I like need that because of my, minor object permanence problem of forgetting that people exist if they're not like in front of me in some way. So keeping like online friendships, is great in some ways, and also in some ways is really hard because I have a lot of like contextual physical clues for thinking about people. And so until someone is like embedded in my physical world, like it's really hard for me. Anyway, that's a whole nother
you have to like
topic.
water the plants, don't you, in situations like that? How often do you message? Do you just message and say hi and how are you doing and then just leave? Or do you have to continue for a certain amount of time to make sure that the person knows that you're getting in contact because you're still friends with them? Or there's so many different complexities, I think, to social relationships. But when you find someone who is on your wavelength, they're like, you go to them and say, hey, I'm so sorry, I've just been so busy and I just haven't been thinking about anything but what I'm doing at the moment, and I just haven't had the social battery to talk to anyone. And it's like, oh yeah, don't worry about it. Like, how you been? And you just jump into a conversation. But I think some people can definitely be like that.
Yeah, definitely.
You feel very annoyed if you don't talk to them. Usually neurotypicals.
Yeah, I'm just not friends with those people. Like, I'm not a good.
They just drop off. Like,
right,
they just
exactly.
drop out.
Another thing I've noticed, and I guess I experience this more in like work, so settings where maybe I'm around someone because I have to be, or like they're a friend of a friend, or like a friend's partner or something, where I'm not necessarily directly friends with them, but they are there in my life. Is if they take my basic like autistic traits personally, like if somebody takes a shutdown personally because they think I'm intentionally not talking to them, even though I'm kind of trying to indicate or like get away, or like, I think about that there's, and I think this goes back to what you're saying about, people just being more accepting of a wide range of expression and being and thinking, right? Just being aware of like, oh, if somebody's not responding in exactly the way I think they should be responding, it's because they're just different than me, and that's okay. And it doesn't have to be an explanation thing. Yeah, exactly. So anyway, I definitely, when people take my traits personally, I'm just like, I don't even want to explain this at this point. Like, let's just not.
I think that definitely like comes with time, doesn't it? Because initially you're like, oh, right, I'm working on and I'm understanding people and doing all these social things. So you just try to fit into these boxes to satisfy other people in your life. And then at some point you're like, you know what? I don't really care that you don't like me being direct. We're just not going to be friends if you don't like that. I like being direct. I think it's better. You may not think so, but
yeah. And that's
it's
okay.
it's bringing, because we spend a lot of our lives trying to fit in with other people and not a lot of time thinking about what people can do to fit in with us. And that is something that's wrong with the education system to some degree, about not having kids and adults understand what autistic people are like and what they struggle with, and what assumptions that neurotypicals may have of them that are not accurate or don't really mean anything. That's really important. But also knowing that, you know, if the people who really like you and really want to be around you, they will pick up some slack. They'll try to understand. They'll be curious. They'll be understanding. They'll want to meet you halfway on things. And I think just having a mentality of being like, this person's meeting me halfway. I want to be friends with them because they're like respecting who I am and how I work. And if they're not doing that, then, you know, it's just not something that I think at this point in my life that I'm willing to give energy to.
Totally. And two of my best friends over time, like my college best friend and then sort of my like current adult best friend, neither of them are autistic. They might even be neurotypical, honestly. I mean, I don't assume that of anybody. Also, I mean, just I'd like to touch on this as much as possible. Being like gifted is by definition not neurotypical, right? If you're in the little tippy tip of the bell curve, it is not neurotypical. But anyway, other than that, true. Which, you know, both of these people are, other than that, like they don't really have a lot of other kind of neurodivergent things that I can pick up on. I don't see any of that. And they've both made an effort with me over time, right? Like they made an effort to understand me. They found my, you know, because this was well before I knew I was autistic, when I met both of them, like they both, you know, found me like funny and charming instead of annoying and immature, right? Like they liked what I was doing. Yeah.
It's the curiosity that
totally
brings people in, and it's the open-mindedness, you know, something that we say that autistic people don't have. You know, it's obviously double empathy is both the same ways, right. But someone who's open-minded, who can, you know, believe you that you work in this way and this is not just some strange way of being that you're doing to annoy them or to make things difficult. I think that's a really important part of that curiosity and the open-mindedness and willingness to adapt. It's massive.
And curiosity as a mindset requires a certain amount of safety, I think. Like to be able to be curious, you have to feel safe enough with where you are, what you're doing, right? Like curiosity is this very like open frame. And that when you feel unsafe and you're like shutting down or, you know, closing down, you still, totally. I mean, I don't know. That's my experience of curiosity, is this very like open feeling. And I think about that a lot of, well, again, another rabbit hole, but like how a lot of children's experiences they're not in a safe space. I mean, certainly in America, if you are a child in a school, you know that you could be shot at any time. And I think it's just absolutely nuts that we are continuing to allow that to happen. And that's just like, how could they possibly feel curious and like open and safe in that setting? So anyway, I don't want to go down that road just because I do want to.
No. But I think that you could translate that to anyone anywhere, because you know, bullying, isolation, mental health illness, suicidality, self-harming. There's so many horrible SA. You know, there's so many things that autistic people just have to deal with more, and we're already so unsupported by the systems that we have at the moment that, you know, I think that can be true. And I think for a lot of autistic people, a lot of kind of autistic people that I know and I sort of meet out and about, they do have very kind of closed minds sometimes, but I don't think that's because they're autistic. I just think that, you know, I just think about how much trauma and how much difficult experience that these people have to go with, that you're obviously going to be quite closed off and willing to put your needs ahead of people, and because it's just something that you've experienced, and it's something that, you know, has followed you from childhood to adulthood. You know, all these defense mechanisms that we have. That's, I think, in an ideal world where we are supported well and we are able to feel safe, I think, you know, perhaps a lot of the issues that we might have with integration and employment and things, and mental health even, would be alleviated a lot. But it's hard, isn't it? Because but those traumatic and difficult experiences are often just so tightly knit to being autistic that it can be hard sometimes to know what's something just inherently because you're autistic, and what's something from your experiences. Definitely something that I think needs to be worked on within the school systems and the workplace and the media.
Totally.
Hopefully things will change.
Yeah, I think I see some good directions in language, like people talking about it in better ways. I also saw a post the other day from an American autistic parent, and they are autistic and their kid's autistic, and they were like, just so you know, you adults diagnose, you know, like people who are taking in this lovely, you know, content for adults on autism that's like accepting and about, you know, taking care of yourself and all this stuff. She was like, just so you know, on the other side of it, the stuff that's being aimed at parents of autistic kids is like horrible and just as bad as it always was. And that's really unfortunate. So there's this big gap between what's being aimed at supposedly allistic parents of autistic kids. I say supposedly because, you know, it's genetic.
Yeah, it's
but yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Is that Natasha from I Want to Tell You books?
Might have been. I don't remember who it was.
They do like neurodiverse, inclusive parenting.
Yeah.
Very cool to check out for any parents who listen and
yeah,
wanting to know what the best way to approach parenting is. I would definitely go to Natasha.
Very cool.
Or my mom. My mom's great.
Aw. So great.
Sing her praises. I won't sing my praises, but I'll sing my mom's
Very
praises.
good.
She's
Yeah.
a gem.
That's what we need, are little clusters of autistic people talking each other up. We're just like, yes, that person over there is great.
Yeah. It's true. It's true.
Yeah. Awesome. So last couple of questions. Where can people find you? And then if you would like to answer the optional question, do you have any advice for yourself at another age?
I like that one. You can find me on pretty much all social media platforms. I would highlight, well, it's at Thomas Henley UK on Instagram, particularly. I produce daily blogs and podcast reels and reels every day. It's about 3 pieces of content every day. I also do updates on my life and my fitness journey over on there. I do use TikTok. I'm posting a bit more lately. It's not massive. I use Twitter a little bit now and again. And of course, yeah, if you want to go check out my pod, I talk to a lot of notable people, whether it's celebrities or researchers or autistic adults within the community, on a lot of different topics. It's very much a long form kind of content coffee chat thing. So if you want to go check that out, that's Thoughty Auti, the Autism Podcast. You can find that on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, all of those things.
Awesome. And we will link all of those in the show notes as well to make them easy to find.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. And then do you have any advice for yourself at another age?
I'd say that, you know, the time that I probably want to give myself advice is in my teenagehood, when I was going through a lot of mental health difficulties. I already kind of had in my mind that I wanted to do something positive with the negative experiences that I was having. But I think I would have wanted to be kinder to myself and to think of myself more as someone that I cared about rather than this object that I used to be productive, this body that I used to be productive. So I tell myself to take better care of myself and try and value myself a lot more than I did, and not necessarily derive my value from the people around me and how well I was fitting in with the people around me.
Oh my God, using my body as a thing to be productive.
Yeah,
True.
just yeah. You, in the morning, what am I gonna do today? I'm gonna do this, and this, and like I wouldn't give that to my friend to do.
Right.
Well, it's like you wouldn't give that to your kid. You wouldn't give that to anybody, not even someone at work. Like,
Yeah.
avoid that burnout.
Oh my God, burnout. That's like
That's
so
my
much on my
recent
mind.
podcast episode.
Yeah. Oh, awesome. Yeah.
Very long one though. It's about 2 hours.
Oh wow. Yeah, I'm obsessed with it as a topic. Cool. Okay. So, thank you so much for being here. This is really, really lovely. And we'll put all those links in the show notes. And I will also be sharing the episode whenever I'm on your podcast as well. I'll be letting people know about that. So, thank you so much. And definitely, if you're on social media, go follow Thomas on whatever you're on because it's really, really great, consistent content.
And if you're listening to this podcast, make sure to rate and like it if it's on YouTube, and make sure to send in some messages and get it shared about because it's very much needed.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thanks for listening. If you know someone who would be helped by this podcast, please share it with them. And I'd love to hear your thoughts and suggestions at mattia@mattiamurray.com. That's MATTIA at MATTIAMAUREE.com. Thank you.